Taha! Welcome to part two. In the first part, at the end, I finished up talking about the prompts for the Tennessee Williams choice. If you are a Tennessee Williams person, then I've pretty much taken care of you at this point. But then let's move on to the Arthur Miller choices, just in case any of these are just as persuasive or more persuasive to you to write about for paper 3 in drama. I have organized these a bit according to theme, as I have for the Glass Menagerie prompts, and I hope that any of these could be lucrative to an argumentative paper about this play. So first, I want to look at a binary opposition set up in the play The Death of a Salesman, and it's the pastoral versus the industrial. And both seem to live in a tension in Willy Loman's mind, which is what I introduced you all to in this first sentence of this first prompt on Death of a Salesman. Consider the cultural tensions residing in protagonist Willy Loman's psyche, the pastoral versus the industrialized. Although he is a salesman, Willy's desire to plant a garden is a recurring motif in Death of a Salesman. In the opening scene, he laments that you can't raise a carrot in the backyard. Near the play's end, when Biff confronts him, he is still attempting to plant a garden. Despite how futile this effort seems, we likely believe that there is hope that man can learn. In a literary analysis, prove how Willy's recurring references to gardening and planting combine to provide more important insight into his character as well as American culture in 1949. So your argumentative hinge is to prove the historical permanence, the historical root, the cultural root, and the artistic root of this ideal of the pastoral in Willy Loman's psyche in Death of a Salesman. So your research responsibility would not only be to research the play itself, especially avenues of about how Willy Loman's psyche is compartmentalized, any psychological dysfunction that you may find in your research about Death of a Salesman. There are going to be several options available to you in your research about Death of a Salesman that just focus on Willy and the mind of Willy, because that's what the whole play is structured by. It's inside his own head, right? Was the original title for this play before it was revised to a much larger universalized title, Death of a Salesman. So for this one, you may have to have a bit more of a background in understanding what the pastoral is in the first place and its juxtaposition to the industrialized world, how in the mid-20th century we are still battling this opposition, this tension between the pastoral and the industrialized, and what kind of effect it would have on somebody like Willy Loman in the situation that he was in, so inhibited by his socioeconomic status. So that would be your responsibility for Death of a Salesman, is in this first prompt, is to explore that tension and create some sort of argument as to why this tension is important to the characterization of Willy Loman. And have some historical roots in it. I'd really like to see some extra research done and historical awareness, cultural awareness in this prompt, in this essay. Okay, number 2. This one is going to look familiar because it mirrors the first prompt for the Glass Menagerie, because you will use a lot of what you know of dramatic visions in order to write this paper about this play if you choose prompt 2. So in broad terms, a tragedy is a work in which the main character is brought to ruin, usually as a consequence of a predominating weakness or tragic flaw. the Greek word for that tragic flaw being the hamartia. According to Aristotle, my homeboy, the fall of the protagonist creates pity and fear in the audience, and the release of these emotions provides catharsis. That's what makes a successful play to Aristotle, is the catharsis ultimately. Typically, a tragic hero is a person who is highly renowned or prosperous, a description that does not apply to the aptly named Willy Loman. However, many critics have characterized Death of a Salesman as an American tragedy, a quintessentially American tragedy. In a literary analysis, prove why the play is rightfully classified as a quintessentially American tragedy, supporting your position with specific evidence from the play and secondary sources, obviously. So instead of trying to argue that this play is a tragicomedy, because it's not, it's unanimously considered to be a tragedy. But the conversation about Death of a Salesman is not so much about its comedic elements, but what makes it so quintessentially American. And there will be scholars that say Death of a Salesman isn't anything new. We've seen this before. It is a pure tragedy in the classic definition as it has been. But to me, and to all of the scholarship that I have read, based in the theater community and what Arthur Miller has written about tragedy himself, this is a quintessentially American tragedy. No play had been written like this before that focused so much on the American body and the politicized American body. So your argumentative hinge is to prove that it is quintessentially American. So you use some of the dramatic visions characteristics from the graphs that we learned about early on in Unit 3, but then bring in some characteristics of what it means to be an American, because what Arthur Miller is going to do is undercut so many of those ideals of what it means to be an American, that we live in pursuit of happiness. And it certainly seems that Willy Loman lived in pursuit of happiness. But it doesn't look like the idealized narrative that is fed to us our entire lives until we get to that adult working age, and even into his 60s, which was how old Willy Loman was in this play. It's not a narrative that unfolds as we expect it to. We are often let down. Willy Loman is let down despite his work ethic. So if you can think of many of those other characteristics that we would use, or traits that we would use to define what it means to be an American, Arthur Miller is going to undercut those. He's going to subvert those. He's going to dissolve those and really question whether those exist. And at the core, he's going to show what it means to be an American. If we focus that on Willie, if we focus that on Linda, that'd be a really cool American female study. If you could do a bit of character analysis about Linda too, about Biff and Happy, what they're inheriting. Your organization of this paper can be really varied and unique and up to you, because I haven't given you any of those characteristics that I want you to focus on. But it's a hard prompt, because you would have to draw so much from your research and your own understanding of what it means to be an American on top of your understanding of a tragedy, but it has been done, and students have written beautiful work from this prompt too. All right, that's number 2. Let's look at number 3. Lastly is, in number 3, you'll focus more on the structure of the play and the language and those what Arthur Miller called memory scenes, that everything's happening in Willie's head. There are no flashbacks. It's all happening in real time, but we're experiencing it as it would happen in Willie's head, and he moves from the present to the past to the double past often. And it's what makes Death of a Salesman challenging to read, but satisfying whenever we finish it. So number 3 reads, Death of a Salesman uses stream of consciousness as a literary technique to tell the story of Willie and his family. And this is unique. The novel had already experienced, or it had already experimented with interior monologue and stream of consciousness in the early 20th century. Folks like Virginia Woolf and Mistress Dalloway, James Joyce and Ulysses, the typical American reference to stream of conscious is going to be people like William Faulkner, all over the place. And even in France, you look at Gustave Flaubert in Madame Bovary. What Arthur Miller had done is he had taken this novel form from the book form and put it onto the stage and see how it works. And it was a really novel idea. Novel in the way of new, I guess. And to move on with the prompt, we're focusing on stream of consciousness, and I am a little bit stream of consciousness right now trying to explain this, so I'm glad that y'all are sticking with me. The structure of the play, although at times confusing, delivers a unique perspective into the characters and their lives. So here's the prompt. In a literary analysis, analyze and argue Miller's use of stream of consciousness to the structure of the plot of Death of a Salesman. Consider how this use of stream of consciousness contributes to the audience's understanding of the play and how it may have been different if used in a traditional structure. If we didn't see everything going on in his head, Aristotle would have a field day if this play were not inside Willie Loman's head, because we'd have to restage everything so many different times. There'd have to be clearer transitions. There would be so many flashbacks, and it would be difficult, even more difficult to follow if it were staged in the traditional linear structure within the limitations of theater. There'd be so many messenger speeches. We'd have to have so many more characters. Whew, it would be a mess. So putting this all together in a stream of consciousness in Willie Loman's head was a unique addition to the narrative power of theater in Arthur Miller's work. And I'd like students to explore that and argue why the stream of consciousness is necessary to the plot, and inform all of that with research and your own independent reasons. If you have gone through all of these prompts and you think, Miss Solomon, I don't know what you expect me to do with these. These just do not work for me. And if you have some other idea, then email me, talk to me about it. I hope that all of these in some way can be inspired from, so that you can write an analysis that I know will work based on what students have done in the past, what has worked in the past, and what has not worked in the past. But I hope any of these could be a plausible avenue for you, and I'm happy to answer, as always, any questions that you might have about your responsibilities, expectations for your most important paper in English 1020, paper 3. Thanks for listening, and best of luck to all of you.